Rushanara, please.
Thank you very much. I've got some questions on climate change. So there was a report that came out in May 2021, published by Greenpeace UK and WWF UK, and they found that UK financial institutions are responsible for 1.8 times the UK's annual net emissions of CO2. And finance sectors are driving the high carbon economy, yet there's currently no requirement for it to reduce the emissions in line with the government targets, unlike other industries. So that's the context. I just wondered what you make of that report and what your thoughts are on what the finance sector should be doing. We've had a number of banks come give evidence in their decarbonisation inquiry and have talked about what they're going to do in the longer term, but there seems to be a huge gap here in terms of what's happening now and what's being promised for the future.
Yes, so we're doing more and more in this through time, and particularly because the government has just added climate change as a have regard for our activities, and actually Parliament also added it as a have regard for the piece of legislation that just went through to implement Basel 3.1. And we're glad to see that because we've been doing more, and this will make us go further. One caveat I'd have is that, my opinion is that it's a decision for Parliament and parliaments around the world and governments as to what the transition path is actually going to be. It's not a decision for central bankers or regulators, in my view. That must be set from above. But we then do, I think, have a pretty important supporting role. And the main one, in particular in relation to the PRA's business, is to make sure that firms are on this, that they understand the risks that they've got and that they're managing them actively. And our strategy on that has basically been that we published a statement back in 2019 saying, here's how we think this should be done. I then wrote to all of the firms actually in July of last year, notwithstanding everything else that was going on at that point, to say, or to provide some pointers on sort of good and bad things that we've seen, and to say that we needed to see compliance by the end of this year, which we are currently in. So that's becoming a big issue for supervision right now. And indeed, we have firms for whom we are elevating this as a key risk, where we think they're off against the expectations we have. The other big thing we're doing this year is this exploratory scenario, which I can come on to if you're interested.
So just on that, you launched that, and one of this is around stress tests, and I suppose one of the questions is about capital requirements. Why are you not planning to use the outcomes to set capital requirements?
So basically, we think firms need to be getting across this. We do not yet have, either in the UK or, by the way, globally, the kind of detailed mapping of the transmission mechanism from climate through into banks' capital positions that we would need actually to calibrate a capital requirement. And the Basel Committee has actually just published very recently a very good paper which sets this out and which shows that, which I think is quite useful, we don't need some new category for climate. We can use the existing bits of the Basel framework, credit risk and market risk and all the rest of it, to capture this. But the evidence base at the moment is a bit too macro. So it tends to be about what's the impact of this going to be on economies and that sort. But we'll use the exploratory scenario to start building up some of that. And we're also asking insurance companies to lay that out in something called their ORSA, to say, well, how do they get confident that they've got this covered? And I think we'll be able to learn from that.
So what's the time frame then by which we can expect much more granular data that helps to get past this point you're making about it being too macro, and so that we can start to see climate risk being priced in to what they do, what companies do?
Well, I think it's partly the granularity question, which comes to disclosure and a taxonomy. Now, the government has committed to take forward a UK taxonomy in the context of COP26, and I think is intending to deliver on that. That will help. Also, we need, I think, much better related to that disclosure from companies, and we've expected our firms to have decent disclosures in place by the end of this year. But that's part of a wider government-led initiative to have all UK companies doing it by the end of 2025. I think that we need the international solution to this as well. And I think the best shot on that, to be honest, is this proposal from the IFRS Foundation, which could really get it into the accounting world. And we're supporting that. I'm sorry, you'd probably like me to say it'll all be known and sorted tomorrow or next year, but realistically, I don't think it's going to be.
Well, when is it going to be? And just on that, I mean, you mentioned about providing a supportive role. Isn't there a leadership role for the bank to take? I mean, the former governor of the Bank of England was very proactive. The current governor has expressed some reticence in one speech he recently made. Is there the leadership at the bank now on climate change and getting companies to understand climate risk better and putting in the measurements and the changes that are required so that you can answer this question, if not now or next year, then that you have a line of sight where you can answer the question when we can expect sort of clarity of when companies will be ready, so they don't come to this committee as they did in the last inquiry we had to say, yes, we've got a plan for the long term, but you're going to have to give us time, and in the meantime we'll carry on being one of the largest emitters, finance, financial sector, the City of London, causing grave harm in other parts of the world through what they're investing in.
Well, look, I completely understand your frustration on the narrow question of leadership. I really do think we have that. Andrew is very committed to this. My colleague Sarah Breeden puts a huge amount of energy into this topic, and she's also just been appointed to the Financial Policy Committee. I imagine she'll appear before this committee at some point. So I really do.
Can I just? That's great. That's really reassuring to hear. Can I just ask the Bank of England's Mr. Bailey? There's a report saying, according to Reuters, that he was unconvinced by carbon capital rules. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
Well, I think the reason that Andrew said that was for the reason that I just gave, which is there's not yet a prudential... Yeah, there's just not the evidence to do it. So we could just invent something, but I don't think we should do that. The elephant in the room here, of course, is that until it's clear what the path is going to be, which, as I say, is a decision for governments and parliaments, not for us, it's very hard to work out what you should capitalise for.
Sure, but somebody needs to work it out, and I don't think the government's going to be doing it. And you've got a limited amount of time between government and the central banks to save the planet. So I'll leave that to you to ponder, and perhaps next time, Mr. Woods, we can have more clarity about how the data is going to generate.
Must do better.
No pressure. Just one target, which is how to save the climate, coming through the financial services leadership dimension to all of this. Thank you.
Okay.